webinars, but today's webinar is by Zach Kennedy, Extension Specialist, University of Illinois. It's Illinois Demographic Snapshot and Review. So Zach's going to provide some background information, some resource information, and then we also have time for questions at the end. Zach has worked with quite a few of you, actually, probably across the state. So as many of you are familiar with him. He is our data guru, although he doesn't like it when I say that, but he is our data guru and has a really good sense of how to use and interpret data that describes communities, counties, and regions in the state. So Zach, it's really nice to have you for the next hour, and I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks for the introduction, Anne, and thank you all for joining this afternoon over your lunch hour, probably for most of you. So as far as our agenda for today, we're going to be taking a look just at some basic population trends, specifically what's happened to total population since the last census. We're going to be looking a little bit at Illinois job growth. What are some of the industries and occupations that have grown in Illinois? We're going to take a look at unemployment trends, which can be an indicator of the health of an economy in a given place. And then finally, we're going to talk about University of Illinois Extension data resources that we can make available to you. So these are different reports and analyses that we can put together and may be informative. So if you're interested in any of those after the presentation, you can contact me and we can talk about maybe pulling together some of that information for you. And then finally, we will have the opportunity for you all to ask questions, and I will try to answer them to my best of my ability. Some of them I may have to do some research and get back to you, but you will have that opportunity. So first thing is, why is a working knowledge of data and data resources important? Put very simply, data about your community or county can be empowering. It can allow you to understand what some of the strengths and weaknesses of your particular community or county are. It can allow you to identify opportunities and as well as issues that may need to be addressed, which all can help make informed decisions and plan for the future. It can also be very important if you're doing any grant work, doing that documentation piece. A lot of the grants require census data or figures that sort of document or back up the particular need you have for a grant. We see that it's quite common that they want some of that secondary data and information included in your grant application. So the first thing I'll mention is, in order to present comparisons that are closer to apples, I'll present the county information by comparing counties in groups. And these groups will include the Chicago metro counties, so Cook, DuPage, Kane, Lake and McHenry, and Will, the urban counties, and then the rural counties. This is a simple typology where the counties that are considered urban are those that have a large city and a county population above 100,000 that are outside of the Chicago metro area. Breaking it down into three categories like this isn't a perfect approach, and counties such as Vermilion or LaSalle may in some instances be considered urban, and there are also definitely varying degrees of rurality. An alternative approach might have been to use the USDA's rural-urban continuum codes for classification. However, the three-category approach taken here was done for practicality reasons. And so if you look on the screen, you'll see that the counties in the Chicago metro show up in blue. We have the green counties are the urban counties, and then the tan counties are the rural counties. I should also mention that the data presented is not meant to suggest that a county is good or bad in that sense. It's rather just what the data shows. And further, the estimates and measures presented are not perfect. They have margins of error associated with them, and they should really be considered in concert with the local knowledge that you all have about your counties. So again, this is kind of the map, and this will be the way that I'll present some of the figures. So looking at the state level as far as short-term population trends, the population figures on this slide come from the U.S. Census Bureau, and specifically they come from the 2010 decennial census as well as the 2015 population estimate series. The 2010 census was already 6 years ago, and so it's kind of informative to look at what's happened population-wise since then. And so on this table, what we have here is a look at the top 5 and bottom 5 states in terms of growth. And so we see this change measure here, and that's how these are ranked. So Texas, California, Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina were the top 5 states as far as adding number of people. And at the bottom of the list was New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Maine, Vermont, and West Virginia. West Virginia was actually the only state in the Union that was estimated to have lost population over that 5-year time period. We see some of the larger, more populous states at the top, which is unsurprising. We would expect larger states to add more population. And we would expect, we have some of these New England smaller states at the bottom of the list, which is also unsurprising. Since they're smaller states, we would expect to see them add less people. And as far as Illinois, the population change between 2010 and 2015 was an additional 29,363 people. That ranks Illinois 40th among all 50 states, and the 2015 actual population estimate is 12,859,995 people. So another way to look at it and think about it is not only just how many people did you add, but from a relative growth perspective. So what is the ranking by percent growth? And so we get kind of a different list of counties when we look at it that way. We have North Dakota, Texas, Colorado, Utah, and Florida at the top of the list. And then we have Rhode Island, and here's Illinois, ranked 47th. Maine, Vermont, and West Virginia at the bottom of the list. So here we're looking at percentage change in population over that time period. Unsurprising to see North Dakota at the top of the list with all the activity that happened in the Bakken formation with the oil extraction activities. Some of that has cooled down over the last couple of years, but really they're still seeing a bump over the 2010 population figure based on all the people that moved in to support the oil extraction activities happening there. And so Illinois, again, we only grew by 0.23% over that time period, which ranked 47th among the 50 states. So not necessarily a rapidly growing situation for Illinois over the last 5 years. So what we have presented on this page is just a map displaying the 2015 estimated population for each of the counties within the state. The counties are shown in red. Well, red is Cook County. It's the largest. Orange, unsurprisingly, are the collar counties. Those are the second most populous tier of counties. Then we have some of the mid-sized counties, the downstate metropolitan areas, shown in yellow. So we have Sangamon and Champaign, for instance, and St. Clair and Madison. And then as you get towards the green, those are the least populous counties in the state. As far as the largest and smallest counties, we see Cook and its collar counties as the most populous counties in the state. And then we have some southern Illinois counties that are the sort of least populous areas within the state of Illinois. And again, here's the 2015 Illinois population compared to what it was at the 2010 census. So if we look at actual population change, this map here is looking at the counties that have been classified as rural for the purposes of this presentation. And what we see is that on balance, the rural counties have depopulated over the last 5 years. There have been some exceptions, but it appears that depopulation has been most pronounced in the northwestern portion of the state. Some of the rural counties did actually gain population, so Williamson, Monroe, Woodford, Grundy, and Johnson. The plus number here shows how much they've gained since the 2010 census, and then the bolded number is the 2015 estimated population. And then as far as the rural counties that have lost population, we see some of the larger counties that fall into that category are actually some of the counties that lost the most people. So Vermilion and LaSalle being at the bottom of the list as far as population growth. They've actually had they've lost over 2,000 people each since 2010, or between 2010 and 2015. So that's kind of what the rural counties look like. As far as the colors on the map, the counties that show up in red are the ones that have lost the most population. Orange is kind of the next tier. And then the counties that show up in green actually gained population over that time period. looking at the urban counties, so this is the same sort of view but of population change, but looking specifically at the urban counties. Um, Overall, the urban counties outside of the Chicago metro region gained population. However, all the estimated population gain took place in 4 counties, which were Kendall, Champaign, McLean, and Sangamon. So the gain in population in those 4 counties was enough to offset the loss in the other counties. Um, some of the areas lost a significant number of people. Winnebago County, which is Rockford, is the main city, and also St. Clair County were leaders as far as depopulation. And then again, it's the same sort of color scheme where the counties in orange also lost population, and the ones shown in green gained population. And the figure shown within the county is the actual estimated number of new individuals or fewer individuals that that reside in that county. And then if we look at the Chicago metropolitan region specifically, all the Chicago metro counties grew in population with the exception of McHenry County here. Cook County grew the most, adding 43,194 people. Population growth in Cook County, actually I was surprised that it occurred both in the city of Chicago itself as well as the suburbs. I expected to kind of see the suburbs driving the overall growth of Cook County, but the city accounted for about 30,000 of the estimated 43,000 additional individuals living there. And the city of Chicago itself grew from 2.69 million to 2.72 million people over that 5-year time period, 2010 to 2015. So now I'll talk a little bit more about, we've looked at population change, and that can answer the basic question of whether a place is growing or shrinking. However, if you examine the components of population change, it can tell a richer story about really what's happening in a place. So what's shown on here on the screen is a basic population change model, and examining each of these individual components can tell a little bit more about what's going on. So going into each of the individual components isn't really feasible in this presentation given the time constraints, but I wanted to introduce the concepts and offer my assistance in pulling this data together for you later if your county is interested and you're interested in looking at what those numbers look like. So the first component is the natural change component, and that's simply the number of births in a given place and then subtracting out the number of deaths. So if you have a negative value, that can indicate that you have a population that's aging. So you have less babies being born compared to elderly individuals passing away, or just people, mortality rate in general. So the aging populations, as populations age, it will increase the need for senior housing options and healthcare in a given geography. So that's something to keep in mind. And obviously, aging populations may have implications for the type of services that are required and the government may provide. So that's the natural change component of the population change model. The second component, and sort of the more dynamic component, is net migration. And net migration is simply domestic migration plus international migration. These values can be positive or negative depending on your place. So you may be losing individuals to these two components, or you may be gaining individuals. And what these two show us is, the domestic migration piece is basically answering the question, is your county a destination for people who have previously resided in another county? And then the international migration piece is your county a destination for people immigrating from other countries? And so net migration in most cases is the dominant driver of population change in growing places. And understanding this information and how your county's population is changing will help county government understand their constituents and identify opportunities or issues that need to be addressed. So again, I'll offer my help for anyone who wants to contact me and look at what those individual components of population change look like for your county. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to look at a little bit about the Illinois economy. This slide here looks at data. It was prepared actually by a colleague of mine who's in the same PhD program, Max Eisenberger. Unfortunately, 2013 is the most recent data that this particular data set is available. If anyone is interested, this comes from the U.S. Census Bureau's Business Dynamics Statistics, which are freely available online, but they're not necessarily always straightforward to interpret. So important limitations to consider when looking at these numbers is this excludes self-employed individuals. So really this is a look at wage and salary work. It also excludes most government employees and individuals who are employed in domestic service. So really this is looking at private sector wage and salary work. But what it shows is that between 2004 and 2013, employment in Illinois increased by a net of 248,000 jobs. However, not all companies contributed equally to the job growth. So if you look at the graph here, firms that were between 0 and 4 years old, startups, accounted for all the new jobs within the state, whereas firms that were older than 5 years or 5+ years old actually lost jobs. So this is comparing the expansion of existing firms, the expansion of jobs within existing firms, to the new number of jobs that are created by new startup firms. And so the takeaway here is that startup firms are critical to job growth in Illinois. They accounted for the entirety of the growth. In fact, the existing firms were negative and the startup firms had a positive value. So if you take the 812,776 and you subtract out the 564,000 jobs that were lost by older firms, you come up with the net figure of 248,000 jobs. So the takeaway is that startups are important, but of note is that non-metro Illinois had a lower rate of startup activity than metro Illinois. And so what this graph is saying is that startups as a percentage of all firms in Illinois between 2010 and 2013, in the rural counties and rural areas, the startups comprise 5% of the total number of firms. And in the urban areas, the figure was higher at 7.7%. So more startup activity happening in urban areas, which is kind of intuitive, perhaps. And so if we look at industries and what industries are growing, this is kind of a one-year snapshot. The industries that are listed here and have the blue bars are ones that added jobs over the most recent sort of one-year time period that was available for the data. This data comes from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. And the sectors that have grown are some of the ones we would expect to see, and then we also see sectors like professional services, retail and transportation, manufacturing, and healthcare as those that are adding in new jobs. And some of the commonalities between these sectors are they place a premium on skills, not necessarily just four-year college degrees, but also on soft skills and technical trades. So it's kind of a mixed bag of industries that require those four-year degrees and industries that would require technical or trade sort of training or soft skills. A lot of the jobs in the service industry really require that sort of customer service training or customer service skills. So if we look at occupations instead of industries, and the sort of difference between looking at industries versus occupations is industries help answer the question of what do we make, whereas occupations look at what do we do. So it's just a slightly different way of looking at the employment figures. The top 20 industries or occupations, as far as growth are listed here on the right-hand side. And what you'll notice is that they're pretty consistent with the industry sectors in the previous slide. And again, they include positions that would require a four-year degree, including management or computer analysts. But they also call for soft skills, and some of them call for those trade skills, including the maintenance occupations, repair, machinists, etc. And then there's a note that the production workers, I can go into detail about that later if anyone's interested, but there's reporting issues associated with counting some of those industries, both sales representatives and production workers. So what does all this suggest? In general, successful communities or counties would do two things. One, they would support entrepreneurs. New businesses are critical to job growth. So a lot of the new businesses are responsible for the job growth as opposed to old firms. Not saying that working with business retention and expansion is not also valuable. It is valuable to try to help those existing businesses expand. But really the catalyst for growth is in the startups and small businesses. And then also investing in the workforce. So these new jobs will demand skills, obviously. But it's also important to keep in note that these data are general for the state, and your community or county may be different. So depending on what your local economy looks like and the local condition, it may be slightly different for you locally. So that was just a little piece on the economy and sort of some of the trends in employment. Another way of indicating the overall health of a place or job opportunity is to look at the unemployment rate. And so unemployment rates are an indication of how healthy an economy is. However, they don't paint a complete picture. And one thing to bear in mind is that unemployment rates are related to the idea of labor force participation. An unemployed individual is one who is actively seeking work but is unable to secure it. And in some cases, people become so disenfranchised, they simply stop looking for work. If that's the case, then they're no longer considered a part of the labor force, and then they just don't show up as an unemployed individual, and they don't show up in the unemployment statistics. But looking at the U.S. average, this is the most recent year that's available from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I mean, most recent month. Which is August, 2 months ago. The U.S. unemployment rate was at 5%. Illinois was doing slightly worse than the national average at 5.5%. And then when we look at the rural counties, the simple average was 5.8%. The reason I starred this figure is this is not a weighted average. This is simply taking an simple average of all the figures for each of the rural counties. And one thing I've noticed is that unemployment rates are generally higher in the southeast region of the state. They tend to be higher down here. But overall, the unemployment rates in the rural areas are not a lot higher than the overall Illinois average. So again, the figures displayed here, the darker red counties are the ones that had the higher unemployment rates, and then as you get to the lighter pink, those are the counties that had the lower unemployment rates in August. So we take a similar look at the urban counties, and obviously the U.S. and Illinois averages are the same. Among the urban counties, the simple average was 5.7%. So the unemployment rates among urban counties vary in their favorability compared to the state average. Some are above and some are below. So again, the same thing. The darker ones have the higher unemployment rates, whereas the lighter counties have the lower unemployment rates. So Sangamon County has the lowest among the urban counties. If we look specifically at the Chicago Metropolitan region, the Chicago Metro County average, the simple average is 5% among these counties. With the exception of Cook County, the unemployment rates in all the Chicago Metro collar counties are lower than the state average. So lots of employment opportunity in that region. It's kind of unsurprising. And looking at current unemployment rates give an indication of job opportunity now, but we can also compare unemployment rates to a previous time period, and that can give an indication of which direction the unemployment rates are moving, whether they're increasing or decreasing. So the counties shown in green on this map, this is the look at the rural counties. Counties shown in green actually had lower unemployment rates in August of 2016 than they did in August of 2015. And so the majority of rural counties saw a reduction in their unemployment rates. However, there were a handful of counties that actually saw an increase in unemployment during this time period. So overall in the U.S., there was a reduction of 0.2% in the overall unemployment rate from comparing August 2015 to August 2016. As far as the unemployment rate in Illinois, it reduced by 0.3%. Illinois rural counties matched the reduction at the state level of 0.3% on average. So it's really kind of reflective of the overall state and national trend. We see that a reduction in unemployment rates in the rural areas. So the economy is kind of improving, slowly but surely. So taking a look at the urban counties, the unemployment rate reduction in the urban counties was an average of minus 0.38%. And again, it's reflective of the overall state and national trends. We only saw one county where the unemployment rate actually got worse, and that was McLean County, which is the Bloomington area of the state. All the other metro counties actually had a reduction. And then looking at this same figure and seeing what happened to the unemployment rate in the Chicago metropolitan area, they saw an average reduction of 0.26% in the unemployment rate. So overall, the unemployment rates in the Chicago metropolitan counties improved, though slightly less than the state as a whole. So that was just a brief couple indicators looking at population and some things that are happening with the economy. But now I'm going to shift gears and talk more about present some examples of the different data reports and resources that we can provide to you if your county is interested in some of the information specific to your county that I could prepare at a later date. This is kind of a list. So we have available data for decision makers fact sheets. We have a data for decision makers resource guide. We can do census commuting pattern reports, looking at kind of your labor shed. We can do custom thematic mapping. We can provide access to ESRI business analyst reports, and also we can provide access to Headwaters economics, demographic, and economic reports. And I'll talk a little bit about each of those in order coming up here. So the data for decision makers fact sheets, what they are is, this is a screenshot. They're basically a 4-page PDF that presents information on population, the age distribution, race and ethnicity, income, poverty, the number of housing units in your county, educational attainment levels, employment type by industry, and then retail leakage. We have them available for all 102 counties. They come as a PDF again, and I can make those available to anyone who's interested. They're drawing on some of the same data sources that the other slides I presented were, including the Census Bureau and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, as well as the American Census's American Community Survey data. The next resource I'll highlight is the Data for Decision Makers Resource Guide. And this is a screenshot of the guide. And what this is it comes as also as a PDF, but instead of actually presenting figures, it is an annotated collection of data sources. So you could kind of go and gather your own data. And the resources are broken down into these different categories of county profiles, education indicators, employment and economic, etc. And the PDF itself features hyperlinks, so you can just click on a particular hyperlink that's of interest to you, and it'll take you straight to the web resource that pertains to that particular data point. And it kind of gives a little description of what you might find there and why it might be useful. So it's kind of a nice document with live links in it, annotated bibliography of resources that we can make available to you to help you engage in your work. The next kind of thing I'll talk about are the Census on the Map commutation reports. And really what this on the map system allows for is an analysis of commuting patterns for a given county or community. We can go down to the place level, we can go down to the village or town level and do the same analysis. The example I've taken a screenshot of here is Bond County, and this was done at the county level. So really what this is good for is answering the question, where do the residents of my county go to work? Where do the workers employed in my county come from? And then finally, is my county a net importer or exporter of labor? And so what this is showing on the screen here is for Bond County, where do the workers live? So where does Bond County draw its workforce from? So the largest contribution is from Bond County itself. It gets 48.5% of its labor force from within the county. So those are individuals who live and work within the county. But then Madison County provides 11.3% of Bond County's labor force. And then you can see that it kind of descends from there, and it's showing you the darker the county is, the more people travel from that county into Bond County for work. Similarly, we can take the opposite view and look at where do people who live in Bond County go to work. So where does the outcommuting occur to? And finally, I have another example of that third question I mentioned of, so on net, is my county a net importer or a net exporter of labor? And this is Ogle County as an example. And what this graphic is showing is that there are 7,826 individuals who live outside of Ogle County but commute in on a daily basis for work. There are 7,245 individuals who both live and work within Ogle County. And then there are 14,234 individuals who live in Ogle County, but they go outside to a neighboring county for employment. And so we would say that Ogle County is a net exporter of labor. So it's kind of informative to understand kind of the commuting dynamics and the workforce patterns in your particular county or community. Again, this is available at the community level as well, if anyone is interested in a specific place. Because there's also, dynamics within a county as far as people living in one town and working in another town within the county. So another thing that we can put together are custom thematic maps. I've already shown you some of those as examples with the unemployment rates and the population figures earlier. This is a screenshot here that's just an example of a custom thematic map that can be created. In this case, it was for a map of the number of 4-H aged youth in Western Illinois. That I gave a presentation in our what we call Region 2 of our state, looking at the number of youth that live in each particular county. So the more populous counties in red here have more youth that are 4-H aged in them. But the takeaway is that any census figure or secondary data can be displayed as a map, and sometimes it just aids in quick understanding and quick digestion of a particular data point. Some people tend to be visual learners, and having a map can be better than just a flat table as far as having explanatory power or making a particular point. So if there's a need or a particular census figure that you'd like to have a map created around, that can be done. It's a service we can provide. Another thing that we have access to and we can provide for you are Esri retail marketplace profiles. And what these are is they provide data on retail leakage for a given geography. These reports include information by retail type about the dollar amount spent by residents in a given geography, demand or retail potential for a given geography retail category represents the estimated expenditures by residents in a geography, whereas supply or retail sales indicate the dollar value of purchases in a category that are made within the study area. So the retail gap basically represents the difference between the supply and the demand, and it shows the dollar amount that residents spend in neighboring geographies for a given category of items. So wherever there's a large retail gap in a given category, it may represent the opportunity for business development. So what it says is that people in a given geography are buying X number of dollars in a category elsewhere outside of the borders of your county, and perhaps a business in that category could be developed to capture some of those retail dollars locally. As we know, buying local helps the money circulate through the economy and bolsters things that happen within a given geography. So as far as data sources, if anyone's curious, the supply or retail sales figures come from a combination of U.S. Census Bureau, Dun & Bradstreet Business Database, and then the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And then the demand or retail potential figures come from the Bureau of Labor Statistics annual consumer expenditure survey, coupled with ESRI has a proprietary market database that they maintain. And so that's how they kind of generate these figures. So in this example, we're looking at Scott County, and it says here for the total retail food and drink, about $81 million is spent per annum by Scott County residents in the retail sector, but only $43 million of that is spent within the borders of Scott County. So that leaves a retail gap of $37,880,000 that are leaking out of Scott County. So this type of analysis gets into a little more detail with the different, you can look at specific industries and or retail sectors. And again, we can make these available for you, for your specific county. It's kind of interesting and informative, and it really does kind of make the case for what type of establishments you may want to try to develop in a given place. So the final resource I'll talk about are Headwaters Economics Demographic and Economic Reports. Headwaters Economics is a research group that primarily focuses on land use issues in the western United States. However, they've created this economic profiling system that covers all geographies in the U.S., and they've made it available for free. And these reports pull from some of the same federal resources or federal sources that we've talked about already, including the Census Bureau and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And so this is a screenshot of kind of the output you would get from their system. They, in this case, I chose an Excel output. An Excel output is nice to work with because if you want to make your own custom presentation or you want to pull a particular figure and put it into a different document, you can do so just by copying and pasting out of the Excel. But you can also get a canned PDF if you just want a simple PDF report. And what I really like about their system is that they provide information, that's what's on this sort of left pane, but they also provide this study guide with supplemental information. And what they tell you here is why a particular measure might be important. So they do a little bit of that analysis piece. They talk about the methods, where do they, and the sources. So where did the number come from? Why is a number particularly important? And where you can go to get additional information about a particular data point. So on this page, this is just an example from McDonough County, where they're reporting kind of the age brackets and how many people fall in each of those age categories. So within the system, the reports that are available include socioeconomic measures, a basic demographics report, which is this is one of those. They have land use reports. You could get reports on the agriculture industry or other industries you may be interested in. So there's kind of a variety of different things that are available. And it's really kind of a push-button turnkey system, so you can generate these reports that are well documented and well sourced with reliable data very easily and quickly. So I've really found it to be an indispensable tool, and I'd be happy to pull together any of those reports for any of you that are interested. So that is my formal part of my presentation. I thought I would open it up now for questions or comments from the audience. Feel free to.
Zach,
Yes, go
this
ahead.
is Ann. I'm just going to start off, and then I'll be looking at the chat box to see if others have questions. But this is a question that I often think of, and I don't know what your perspective on it is we always look at population loss, population gain as this kind of all-important measure of how successful or good or whatever a county is. And I just wonder if we should be looking at something that is more aligned with employment, like the unemployment figure or the job loss figure or something, because even if people are coming into a county and they're not employed, it doesn't seem to me like that's a real benefit to that county.
True.
So what are you thinking about?
Yeah, I think those should always be considered in tandem. You're absolutely correct. And often they kind of signal in the same direction. So where we see low unemployment rates and job growth, we're most likely going to see population growth. But you're right. Any of these sort of data points shouldn't be considered in isolation. They really should be considered with other data points. And then I also mentioned at the beginning, they should be considered with your local knowledge, because some of these measures, particularly in smaller counties, tend to have wide margins of error. And so you folks live in the counties and you know kind of what's going on. So you have to, in some instances, take the figures with a grain of salt and couple them with your local knowledge. But that's a good point, that none of these should really be taken in isolation. And just because you have a growing population doesn't necessarily mean that everything is roses for a particular county.
Okay, I'm going to ask another question because there are no
Sure.
questions in the chat box. Another question I have, and this is I've been thinking about this because of the work that both Susan Odom and Russell Medley have been doing in partnership with the USDA SET project. And Susan's done a lot of work with looking at retail loss and opportunities for retail kind of reinvestment that occur on a regional level.
Yes.
That sometimes it doesn't make sense to do that county by county,
Right.
but when you expand that analysis to the region, that then you might identify some gaps in what's provided, what are people looking for, what are they buying, and are they doing that inside or outside the region. So do you have any comments on how a region might think of looking at that kind of data and considering that data as directing them to certain opportunities or potential business to develop?
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. They could again look at one of those marketplace profiles, and those don't have to be necessarily constricted to a given one county. So we can build a custom region and analyze it that way. So you could have a multi-county region and kind of look at that as your borders of your trade area, so to speak, and then see how many dollars are leaking out of that. Put simply, you can add counties together and kind of analyze them all as a region. And you're absolutely correct. But yeah, I think an approach would be, again, to look at that kind of trade and gap analysis and see which retail sectors have that large figure for where people are spending a lot of money, but not a lot of it's being spent within the geography that you're analyzing.
Unmuted.
Yes.
I have a question that I don't expect you to have an answer for immediately, and
Sure.
It's about what I might call the topic of outer ring growth. I remember a demographer pointing out some years ago that for the metropolitan Chicago area, the outer ring grew by 5 miles every decade or so. Right. And let's take it to Peoria County. I'm in a rural county near Peoria. Is there a, let's call it a phenomenon for the moment, of outer ring growth from central city Peoria to the communities outlying as people seek their 3 acres and a homestead in the country, or to get away from problems in the central city, or whatever it might be? And over the coming decades, might we expect an enlargement of that ring? And might that benefit some of the rural communities that to this point have been seeing loss of population and vitality? Or am I just speculating
that
without
suburban
any substance?
No, you're right. That suburbanization phenomenon does still occur, and I can't speak specifically to Peoria right now.
Have to. I'm identifying there are mid-sized cities throughout the state that to which it might apply.
Yes, absolutely. I know that, speaking for the experience of Champaign, Savoy is kind of a suburban area of Champaign, and it's one of the most rapidly growing communities in our county. But yeah, and what we could do...
And I'm betting that some of the little counties, even 10 miles or more beyond Savoy, are gaining a few people who work in Champaign-Urbana but decide they like, I don't know, the small town, the school, or whatever.
Yep. Yep, Muhammad
Okay.
also in the local example. But what we could do to answer that question is we could go, instead of looking at the county level, we could dive down into the community level or even the census tract level and see if that dynamic is present where those sort of outlying, bordering census tracts or communities have gained population over X number of years. And I'd be
Okay.
happy to help you with that if you're
Okay. Yeah,
interested.
we could talk about that later. Okay, that'd be
Yep,
great.
for sure.
Okay. Okay, and it suggests that the vitality of rural America is dependent upon the vitality of these central mid-sized cities in large
Yep.
regard.
That's
Okay.
the idea of rural-urban interdependence, and it goes both ways. The cities depend on the rural areas, and the rural areas depend on the cities. So, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Okay. I have another question, but I'll wait until other questions are asked.
There are a couple questions from the chat box, Zach, but those are mostly how do people request these reports, and is there a cost associated with producing the information for individual counties?
They can just contact me via the contact information on the screen. If you're just dialing in and listening, my phone number is 217-300-9256. I can be reached via email at zkenned2, so like Z Kennedy with no Y, the number 2, at illinois.edu. And if you just shoot me an email, I'd be happy to pull the reports together for you. Fortunately, all of these reports either pull from non-proprietary free data sources, or they pull from sources to which the university already has subscribed. So in short, it would not cost. There would be no cost associated with these reports.
And the also, Zach, if people want to get a hold of you, they can just go to the University of Illinois Extension website and look for you in the staff area.
Absolutely.
Might be an easier way if they didn't get all those, didn't get your address exactly.
Yep.
Nancy posted a link to the archived versions of this webinar and previous webinars to the site. So if you're interested in looking at this again or looking at some of those maps, if you were on your cell phone and you didn't see it and you want to see the maps and listen to it again, you can go to that site and see the webinars from the previous years and previous entries into this series on economic development that we're doing right now.
This is Jim Nolan again. May I pose my second question? And I don't want to get in the way of anybody else.
No, go ahead, Jim.
Okay. This is a public policy question, Zach, and I'm not expecting you to weigh in on a pro or a con on this topic, but it has to do with sales tax. Sales tax is distributed according to where the sale is made. As retail becomes more and more concentrated in the cities, rural areas have been losing retail. So when a sales tax is increased, it benefits the community which generates the sale and does not benefit the community where the dollars come from. And you've discussed retail gaps, and so I'm guessing it's possible to make and I'm not asking to weigh in, but to make a case that sales tax distribution might more fairly be distributed on the basis of where the money comes from rather than where it is spent, which is often concentrated. Anyway, it's an interesting, to me, issue, because if Peoria increases its sales tax for schools, rural areas outside Peoria County would be contributing to the benefit of schools in Peoria at the expense of schools, because the money is not reflected by where it is from. So anyway, your discussion of retail gaps is fascinating, and maybe what I need to do is learn more about that, and so maybe contact you and see how to evaluate those things.
Absolutely, and I'd be happy to have that discussion with you.
Okay, great.
That's another reason to look at all these opportunities and investments on a regional rather than city by city or county by county basis.
Sure. Yeah.
So that I want to make sure that those of you on the call who are looking at the chat box wait until we have two poll questions at the end of this, and Nancy is going to post those in a minute here too. So while you're thinking of your question for Zach, you might be looking at that poll too.
Well, this is Jim Nolan again, just to fill in a blank space here. Chicago city is growing in population, but I'm guessing that within city of Chicago, we're seeing a dynamic in which white-collar young professionals are increasing in numbers very significantly, and that there is a net outflow of what I might call working class people from difficult communities who are able to move. And thus that would change the makeup of Chicago, making it a richer community over the years to come. Is there anything to that, Zach?
That has been the case in the past. I didn't look at the sub sort of city dynamics for this case, but that's something that could definitely be looked at. That could be the case. I'm not sure.
Sure.
Zach, I would say, when I've been with you in communities and counties where you've presented this kind of information, it almost is more valuable for people to look at this data and say, why is this happening and what does this tell us about our community, rather than saying, okay, this is the way it is and we know that's the situation for sure.
Right.
Because you said earlier, the data are descriptions and approximations of what's happening, and the ground truthing of that information is really where we can start to have informed decisions. What's going to work here, and where are we now, and where do we want to be?
That's absolutely right. The data really should be the conversation starter and not the conversation ender. If I understand what you're saying, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Susan just posted a note that says the interesting question because that specific issue related to sales tax distribution and the new school facilities tax, they talked about yesterday in Massac County. So that's Southern Illinois, and they're talking about the same
and
issue.
I'm from Stark County, 5,900 people, no retail, and yet schools.
Right.
Yeah, interesting.
In the last few minutes we have here, I'm wondering if there are any more questions, either posted in the chat box that I can read off, or if you have access to unmute and ask Zach directly. Otherwise, I want to thank you all for your participation. It was great to have the information you presented, Zach, and also the offer to work with communities, counties, individuals if they need more information about their location. Nancy's got one more poll that she's presenting, so if you did the first poll, I think now the second one is open and you can respond. And we appreciate that information. It helps us know if this information was valuable and if we're on the right track. And we're also open to your ideas for additional webinar topics. If you want to send those to Zach, his email is there, to any one of us working in Extension. We can respond to those requests best we can.
And again, I thank you all for taking the...
Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you, and thank you all for taking the time this afternoon to listen, and I'm here to help, so don't hesitate to contact me.
You may have drummed up a lot of business, Zach.
That's good, though. That's a good thing.
It is. It's good. Okay, so thanks so much,